Good evening. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. For those of you who've been here in previous months, thanks for coming back. And thanks for bringing some friends. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'd like to thank the folks here at the Gladstone Institutes for letting us use this beautiful space. Just a couple of announcements before we get started this evening. March 1st, our guest is going to be Susan McGinnis. Susan is CEO of Commitment to Greatness Consulting. Our guest for April is going to be Bill Shireman, President and CEO of Future 500. And then our guest for May is going to be George Zimmer, the former Chairman, CEO of Men's Wearhouse. I would encourage all of you to go to our website and take a look at FutureShapers.com. Take a look at the Meet the Visionaries series, and please sign up, pass it on to your friends, encourage other folks to show up. We've been doing this series since September of last year, and each month we record the events, and the video is on the website. So take a look, share it with your friends and colleagues. We've had some really amazing speakers, and we'll continue through the rest of this year. So thank you. I'm Tom Eddington, CEO and co-founder of FutureShapers. We're focused on bringing more conscious leadership into the world. And the reason we're doing it is if as one of our guests back in November, Lynn Twist, shared with the audience, if we take a look at the world today, all of our man-made systems and many of our natural systems are collapsing before our very eyes. And if we think about it, those systems were designed 50, 60, 100 years ago at a time when the world was much smaller, at a time we were living in a mechanical age. And those systems served their purpose. And they did a wonderful job of meeting the needs of humanity at that time. But they've outlived their purpose. And as Lynn shared with the audience in November, it's time to hospice those out of existence. They did a wonderful job. And without judgment, without criticism, we need to lovingly hospice them out of existence, while simultaneously, as Lynn shared with us, midwife the new systems into existence. And the way that's going to happen, we believe, is through conscious leadership. It's having the awareness that the way that we operate in the world, the way we show up in the world, needs to be different. We need to be much more aware of how we're showing up, how we're being. We're human beings, not human doings. And so part of the work we're doing at FutureShapers is hosting events like this evening, Meet the Visionaries. We host executive peer groups called roundtables throughout the year. We have a 3-day workshop. We have one-on-one consciousness coaching and a variety of offerings. And I would encourage you to go to the FutureShapers website and take a look at what we're up to. I'd like to introduce my co-founder and colleague, John Renish. John is one of the pioneers in conscious leadership. He has written over a dozen books on a topic and has been doing this work really since the late 1980s, and has done a great job of pioneering and getting conscious leadership and the work out into the world. When we started this organization 5 years ago, John and I set up a Google alert for the term conscious leadership. And about 3 years ago, we'd get a notice maybe about once a month from Google saying the term had shown up someplace in the world. Now we don't get one every day, but certainly every couple of days we're getting notified by Google that the term has shown up. And so we're encouraged that conscious leadership is starting to show up in the world. People are starting to really pay attention to what humanity desperately needs. So, John, I'll turn it over to you, and welcome Scott to the evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, it is a pleasure doing these events. And what Tom mentioned is one of the things we do is put conscious leadership roundtables together, which is a group of 10 or 12 leaders with the idea that they can serve as each other's coach, and then there's a host facilitator for each one of those roundtables. So if you have any interest in doing that, let us know. Speak to either myself or Tom or any of the people that will be handling microphones when we get into our Q&A time. So, Scott Coady, I'm not sure when I met you. I can remember reconnecting with you at the Pachamama luncheon several years ago. Do you happen to remember where we met, when we met?
Nope.
Okay. So we're just ships passing in the night, but we reconnected when I don't know if any of you been
Oh,
to
yeah,
the
it was a Pachamama meeting at Fort Mason, I think. We were part of a think tank group they pulled together.
Oh,
That was the first time I met
good
you.
memory.
Yeah.
Mine's going that way. Yours is, good, okay. Well, if anybody's been to the Pachamama Alliance luncheon, the fundraising luncheon, anybody here been there, done that? Okay. Well, you know, it's 1,500 people. It's a big crowd of people. And I probably, if I looked at everyone that walked in the door, which I don't do, I probably know about half of them. And so walking from one place to another through the crowd, you're bound to hear your name called or see 10 people that I know. And I was walking by and I heard, "Hi, John," and it was Scott, and you were with Vikas, as I recall, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. But with that shout out of saying, "Hi, John," started this whole series of events where I've sampled your work at that one day, half day thing you did over at Susan's house. Susan's here too, right there. And love everything I hear about what you do, and was very excited to be able to host you here, because I know you live in Ojai, but to have you here in San Francisco and see some of your fans and family here too as well. One of the things I remember about a conversation we had at lunch in North Beach is that you don't seem to use the word transformation very much in your work. And that sparked my curiosity, is that because apparently people do feel transformed when they do either your 8th-month program, maybe even your samurai game, the one-day workshop.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember exactly, and I wouldn't want to even try to paraphrase what you said when you're sitting right here, and you can answer it again yourself. Why do you choose not to use the word transformation or transformative work?
Well, I think it's a little bit on the jargon side, and I have to kind of chuckle inside as I say this, because I'm on the board of the Transformational Leadership Council, and I started the Association for Transformational Leadership in Southern California. But in terms of programs that people go to and what I offer, you know, that is possible. But I think if you put that in the marketing brochure, you create expectations for people that you may not know what that means for them. And so they may have expectations that are beyond what you're set up to produce, you know? And so a super small change in someone's awareness or thinking, as you know, can transform their whole life. And it can be the smallest thing. And I've certainly seen that many, many times, where someone may not be expecting that or validating that small change. Or if you use the word and someone thinks, well, I need to have everything in my life change, you know, for me to consider myself transformed. So it's just a little bit loaded and a little ambiguous. So I tend to shy away from it in marketing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Why don't you give us a little thumbnail of the scope of your work and what the programs are?
Well, two things primarily. I have the Institute for Embodied Wisdom in Ojai that I founded 10 years ago, where we offer our 6-month-long Art of Leadership Mastery program. And I'll say more about that in a second. So that's one big expression of what I do. And then I'm a consultant. I go into organizations and I work with senior leadership teams to help them become better leaders, more conscious, but connected with each other so they can have a bigger impact on the whole organization. So we can harness and ignite what I call the collective brilliance of everybody in the organization to produce some meaningful result in the world. And so that is a lot of either one-on-one work or work with a small team to get them to become the kind of people that people want to follow. And that's really the common denominator between the two pieces. At the Institute for Embodied Wisdom and the Art of Leadership Mastery program, we're working for 6 months on the self that someone is so that they can move more powerfully into the future, be more able to produce the results they want to produce. And the work is based in two primary strains. Embodiment practice, or borrowing from martial arts, some physical practices we're doing with our whole self, and some of the distinctions in language that came from Fernando Flores' work, The Ontology of Language, and really blending those two things together powerfully.
Okay. Fernando Flores, there's a name that comes up in the past.
I met Fernando when I was in graduate school at age 27. And I just saw him a few months ago, and I realized that I'm 57 now, so I've been embodying those distinctions for more than half of my life. And I got to write him a nice little love note thanking him for all that work, because it's really been a big impact on me.
You want to do a couple of sentences on Fernando for those that aren't familiar with who he is?
Fernando Flores was the youngest cabinet minister in the history of the government of Chile. At age 27, I believe, he was the finance minister, because the country was a socialist country at the time, and the finance minister was in charge of all the state-owned industries. And they wanted to computerize the state-owned industries, and he was a computer genius, so that's how he got the job. And he was put in prison by Pinochet when there was a coup there, and developed a lot of these really groundbreaking theories of human communication and coordination when he was in prison, and then came to this country and made a big contribution in artificial intelligence and philosophy and on and on. So, really great man.
Yeah. Yeah, I met him in 79-ish through Werner Erhard, who brought him into San Francisco and did a communication and action workshop with him, but I could hardly understand him, I have to admit. His accent was pretty thick.
Yeah.
And you also done some work with the Strozzi Institute, right?
Yeah, I met Richard Strozzi-Heckler in 1995, and
Again, can we give him a little background on what the Strozzi Institute is?
yeah. Well, Richard Strozzi-Heckler is a sixth Dan Aikido master and a PhD psychologist who founded an institute to teach somatics and embodiment training in a lot of different modalities or purposes. There's leadership work, there's personal development work, there's also work on somatic coaching, working on people's bodies. And he was also quite instrumental in founding the Lomi School for Healing and Trauma. And so that was a really powerful piece of work that he put together, and I was fortunate to meet him and study with him for quite a long time now.
Didn't he do a lot of work with the military? Can't remember which
Yeah,
ones.
I think right before
Marines?
founding the Strozzi Institute, he partnered with an organization I was part of called SportsMind, and they went into the military and worked with a lot of different elite military units. I think he wrote a book called In Search of the Warrior Spirit, where they documented work with the Green Berets over a long period of time. And he's gone on to work with many other military units on just presence. He had the Marine Warrior Project, where they're kind of training Marines, like Lynn was saying, old paradigms that need to fall away and, midwife some new ones into being. So if you think the Marines, great history, but going into some place and taking over the town or the beach with force. And now in modern day times, you're in a town with women and children, and you're going door to door and having more of a, as Richard would say, a somatic sensibility, so that you're not just trigger happy, but you're able to read the situation with your whole self and be more effective. And that was a really successful project for the Marines. And I know he's worked with a lot of other things we may not be able to talk about.
Mm-hmm. And you probably have too, right?
Well, not as a professional consultant. I haven't worked with military units, but I had the great fortune of being in the Navy when I was very young, 17 to 21, and was never intention, but by luck, I ended up being a navigator for an elite boat unit that supported the U.S. Navy SEALs. So I worked quite closely with them for 4 years and got to be around some of those people and how incredible they were and are and what they do in terms of transforming themselves to be really excellent at everything they do, whether it be having coffee or taking on some of these missions. They're very present and polite, and they never raise their voice. And they just conduct themselves in a way that inspires you to act into your highest self and your best self. Really inspirational.
Yeah. One of the projects that I'm writing and FutureShapers is going to be publishing is called the Conscious Leadership Yearbook, where every year we're going to not only publish articles about conscious leadership, but profile exemplars. So right now we have exemplars from 13, 14, and now 15, 3 years of cohorts, and there's about 100 people from all different sectors. And before I started that project, there were two sectors that I knew I would not find necessarily any conscious leadership. And one was politics and one was the military. And on both cases, I have found people that I would call conscious leaders, considering their job. You may not like their job or what they're doing, but there is a way of being conscious and being a politician. There is a way of being conscious and being in the military.
Sure. Yeah, they have some incredible people in the military. I mean, they have the whole stereotype that we have about that, but they get some very, very bright people who are very open and searching for what's the latest and greatest because they're deeply committed to important things, and they know enough that they're not smart enough to figure it out all on their own. So Jim Shannon, do you remember Jim Shannon?
know
Yeah,
Jim
so that's a
Shannon.
great example of, in that movie, Men Who Stare at Goats, where, they were on the ground zero, the human transformation or personal development movement with Jim and his crew, so.
Yeah, Jim was I think a light colonel, and he started a thing called the 1st Earth Battalion when he was in the military, which was a focus on the environment. And this was a long time ago, because he's been out of the military for a long time.
Well, he had orders from the Army War College to go to Esalen and all the retreats that were going up here in the 70s and find out everything that was going on to see if they could bring that back into the military to make better soldiers. And what's so funny about it was he took it on originally as an Army mission, like a regular Army guy, going to do all this stuff he thought was a little bit hooey, but it transformed him. And then he brought that new thinking into the Army in a much different way and tried to reposition the Army to be for the earth rather than just for the country.
Yeah. And he is a force of nature, that's for sure. It's still going at it, as far as I know. Well, what would you like this audience in San Francisco to know mostly about what you're doing, what you're up to right now?
Well, I think that it's just a continuation of what I've been committed to for many years now. This work of developing ourselves, if you will. I know that you and Tom are deeply committed to the conversation of conscious leadership, which is fantastic, of course. And if anything, I just want to maybe dive into a little conversation about, how the role of us as leaders and our relationship with our bodies can help us with having business, operate on the planet even better than it is now. And so when we talk about conscious leadership, there's obviously a lot of books and a lot of writing on it, a lot of great thinking on it, and it's really making a big difference for a lot of companies. But it's one thing to understand all of that intellectually and to be able to be in a conversation about it. It's another thing to be it, or as Richard Heckler would say, embody it, or embody the commitment to that. And, I don't know about you, but for most of my career and most of my understanding, the body hasn't necessarily been part of the curriculum in business acumen.
Right.
It certainly was, maybe even avoided to be talked about when I went through graduate school, for an MBA. And it's sad because people ignore, now we're getting hip to like stress and maybe exercise and things like that so we can have a little more energy and vibrancy. But when we're leading anything, whether it's ourselves or a small company, large organization, or a movement, we are hopefully, I think, if we're really taking the assignment seriously, we're probably at the edge of our abilities because when we're leading, we're journeying into the unknown. And that's my favorite metaphor for leadership. It's leaders are in the future business.
I like that.
Right? But there's no facts about the future. So it's a journey into the unknown. So we're pioneers, we're explorers, it's when we're really committed to something and bringing something forward that we don't know how to do or hasn't been done yet, we're really getting out there on the skinny branches. And we can do a lot of great work intellectually with the horsepower of our minds. But if we're not bringing our body into the game, then maybe we're not using all of our assets and might be more difficult. Now, there's a lot of examples. I can talk about this for hours if you want, but you want me to continue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're on a run, go.
Okay. So One example would be, so if we are committed to something in the future, and as I said, there are no facts about the future. Now, in graduate school, or when you get an MBA, the training is essentially how to make great business plans to take all the risk out of this journey into the future. And they kind of sell it to you like, if you do a good job at this, it's pretty much guaranteed it's going to work out. And if it doesn't work out, it's not really you. It's, maybe the plan wasn't perfect, but if you wrote the plan, then it's you, right? And I remember running across a quote from Sun Tzu in the Art of War, the old text, where it said, "Never commit yourself to a plan that goes beyond the point of contact with the enemy." So plans are great because it helps stimulate our thinking, and it can be very, very useful. But falling into just following them no matter what's happening could be where the trouble starts. So we want to keep our awareness and our focus and our attention open at all times as we're moving forward into the unknown. So if we buy that premise that it's a journey into the unknown, really, now we can have some plans and we have some ideas and we can move along. Then we need people to join us. So we need customers or employees or collaborators, investors. And so we're inviting them to commit themselves to a journey into the unknown and risk their future on the future that we're committed to. And this is where the body kind of kicks in, because we're social hierarchical mammals, us human beings. And we're always concerned about our future. We're always concerned about our safety. So what will happen is the other people will look at your plan and look at your idea and say, okay, and then what they'll probably tell you is, well, I don't think the market is ready, or I don't like this. They'll give you some logical reason. But what they'll never say is, I checked in with my body, and my body isn't comfortable around your body, so I'm out. And there's a part of the intelligence in our body that's always checking out the other bodies around us when our future's at stake with these people. We still have this intelligence in us. The Japanese call the stomach the hara, it's second brain, and there's as many nerve endings here as there is in our brain. And so if you aren't aware or in touch with your physical self, then you are just using your gray matter to navigate by. It can get you pretty far, but it can also have you get in situations that you might regret later because you didn't pay attention to some intuition or some wisdom that was coming from your physical self. So having practices, having integration of the mind and the body so that you can pay attention to this can really be helpful, particularly when you're trying to build trust and relationship with other people for the sake of this future you're committed to.
Yeah. One of the things that I've mentioned here before is that corporations spend an awful lot of money trying to make better leaders.
Yeah.
I think the last report I heard was 2014 or 13, and an American corporation spent $16 billion. And about 3 or 4% of that, people figured it was worth it. The rest of the people thought it was a waste of time, which is ridiculous.
A lot of it can be a waste of time because they're teaching theory and they're giving a binder.
Teaching up here.
Yeah.
And what we're missing is the embodiment that you're talking
Right.
about.
We're certainly embodying the ability. So another example about all this would be, there's a critical situation in the business, for instance, some big issue or some big problem of some kind. And let's just say, for instance, you're the leader of this and you don't have this training. Well, I'll give you a practical example. A good friend of mine was kind of a number 4 person at a medium-sized healthcare company that was going to get acquired by another healthcare company. The CEO was also the primary stockholder. And there's a lot of negotiations in the deal, and if it goes through, this CEO person is going to be quite wealthy. And my friend wasn't, had a little bit of stock, but wasn't going to become, quite wealthy, but very capable in these kind of situations. And told me the story about the CEO was so overtaken by stress and the situation that he was on the floor, kind of writhing in stomach pain, not able to talk on the phone. So she's talking on the phone to make the deal and doing the faxes. And he just didn't have the body to hold the moment, if you will. And so what happens for a lot of people when they get in a stressful situation, how they show up in the opinion of other people has them start to question whether or not I want to hook my wagon and my future to this person or not. They could be nice and friendly and competent in all other situations, but when they get into a critical situation, how do they act? And they haven't trained for it, or they've ignored their body, so their emotions get the better of them. Look at Howard Dean. He was doing pretty well until he got too excited one night on stage and did a little yeehaw stuff that took him out of leadership at the Democratic National Committee. So we have to pay attention to this dimension and train ourselves. The Navy SEALs say, we don't train until we get it right. We train until we can't make a mistake. And that's embodiment. And then when you train that way, when you know you have the body for the situation, or that you're not going to get rocked by the situation, and you've proven it to yourself, then your authentic self-confidence goes up. You trust yourself. You're not doing the thing and worrying about how you're going to show up. You're just doing it.
There's, I think one reason that so much of the money spent on leadership training is all head stuff. The very small percentage that people say it was worth the expenditure is basically because there's some, I'm going to call it transformational element, but some embodiment that changes the individual so that they have the courage to say the things they wish they had said. Because that's what we hear all the time, is people that are expected to be leaders, and they admire all the people that we can imagine they admire, but they don't emulate the people they admire. They basically sacrifice their aspiration in order to go along, as opposed to having the courage to actually step forward and stand tall and say, no, we're going this way, we must do this. Years ago, there was a little brown pamphlet that Werner Erhard passed out called the Book of Aphorisms. And one of the only one I can remember out of a whole bunch of them is Understanding is the Booby Prize.
Right.
Because at the time, I'm talking 1974, I didn't understand that. What do you mean, understanding is the booby prize? Understanding's everything. No. There's a point where understanding runs out of steam. And you just can get more understanding, you learn more models, you learn about more authors, you learn about more seminars, more workshops. But until you get to that place of embodiment, it's a waste of time.
Yeah, you can certainly talk about the subject well, but can you perform under pressure? Richard Strozzi-Heckler has a saying. He says, knowledge is only a rumor until it lives in your muscles.
I'm glad we're recording this.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. Well, this is our work at NASA. So we ran this leadership program, originally developed it, and then was fortunate enough to have NASA as a client after I developed it with a colleague. And here we get NASA's best and brightest PhD scientists and engineers. And that was kind of our, quote, military training, if you will. And some of these individuals had 3 PhDs, in different scientific or engineering disciplines. And they're incredible people, super incredible people. And a lot of their experience was they did research on something for 20 years, optical computing, for example, and then got huge grants to actually develop something. And now they're leading these teams with a bunch of money, and they just find that they don't have or didn't have all the capabilities they need to have that go well. And because they overemphasized developing their minds, and they had forgotten about their bodies. And so we were able to work with them for a 9-month period of time and really make a big shift for them in how they showed up for other people, so that their projects became more successful and they had a better time and their personal lives got better. And our graduates went on to do many, many great things. One of our graduates, Waleed Abdulati, went on to become NASA's chief scientist after graduating our program. And that program was recognized by NASA and many other institutions as a really fantastic program. It won a lot of awards. And one of the ones we're most proud of is Warren Bennis, the Dean of Leadership at USC, I think now departed, He has a magazine called Leadership Excellence Magazine, ranked the best in leadership development in the federal government / military every year. And our program was ranked number 7 best twice, with West Point being number 5 and the Naval Academy being number 6. But we beat the Navy SEALs and the Army Rangers, so we're pretty proud of that.
No competition there.
Yeah. And what you were saying earlier is a lot of these other programs that you're talking about that are assessed to be a waste of money because, let's just say it's head learning. One of the reasons that happens, I believe, is because that kind of learning is comfortable for people. You can sit there, you don't have to, be uncomfortable. You can read, you can take a test, you can, we're all experts at getting more theory, What got people into some of these companies was being great students in college. And that kind of learning is good, but it may not be enough to get us to where we need to go, particularly when we're in uncharted territory.
What would you say, we can't, I don't think we're set up with the auditorium being the way it is to do exercises that you probably do in your courses. But can you talk about some of the processes that go on? You do?
Yeah. Well, if we want to evolve the self that we are, now, when I say this word, the self that we are, we have to be careful because there's a lot of different interpretations about what the self is. So psychologists have an interpretation of what that is. But we're always talking about it in the context of leadership. And whether that be leading yourself or leading your family or a small company or a large company, pretty much the concern is how you're operating in the assessment of other people. Because leadership is about getting other people involved and committed. And for that to happen, they have to be in relationship with you and they have to trust you. So what's the self that you are that's producing or not producing that relationship and trust? Now, another way of talking about it is how are you occurring for other people? Or how are you landing on other people? And that's what we're primarily concerned about. In your natural, authentic way of being, is it producing enough trust and relationship with other people for them to want to get involved for what you say you're up to and what you're committed to? So what is that, and how do you modify that? So I'll talk about 5 distinctions we have there, and then maybe some of the practices inside of those. So the first 3 are mind, body, and emotions. So in the mental dimension of our beings, so we have things like information, like book learning, okay? We'll have, in that dimension, we'll have our attention and focus. So where we're focused, we think is a mental sort of function. What's occupying our attention, or what are we thinking about? We'll have in that dimension our linguistic abilities and communication and speech. And we'll have our beliefs, which is in the mental function, mental maps we have. So that's on the mind side. On the body side, we have our history. All of our history lives in our body. We have action lives in our body. We take action with our body, let's say. Energy. We need energy if we're going to be up to something, and that comes or lives in our body. Our practices are part of our body. Intuition and wisdom, we think, are part of the body. So then we have emotions. Now, what I learned from Fernando Flores was that emotions are temporary state changes in the body in response to an event that predispose us for action. So I often think of it as almost like a chemical reaction or like a computer code. You put this input and then you automatically get this output. So when something happens and we get angry, someone cuts us off in traffic and we get angry, then we're predisposed to punish. It's kind of like an automatic reaction. If our dog dies, well, that's the event, then the emotion of sadness, and we're predisposed to grieve, to process the loss there. And so it's part of human life. Well, if we're going to be in relationship with other people, and one of the things that we're finding out through Daniel Goleman's work, emotional intelligence and all of that, is that we need to be able to resonate emotionally with other people if we're going to be in a relationship. So if you have someone who's like a block of wood, where they're not expressing any emotions at all, and not very many in a very narrow range, other people may not be able to be in relationship or trust them because they don't experience them as being a real person. or if our emotional life is very, has a lot of peaks and valleys to it, broad range, but high amplitudes, let's say, maybe we don't trust them and want to be in a relationship with them because it's not feeling necessarily safe. It's a little too much. In business, a lot of people kind of clamp down and try to play it safe, I notice. They're not expressing too much at all because they don't want to make a mistake. But then it's hard to trust them because they're not being real, right? So we have to play with that. So on the mind side, we're not going to tell people what to believe, and there's already enough information, and it's on the internet, so we don't necessarily need to give them more information. But we can certainly work on attention and focus, because that's a really big part of who we are, our presence, our ability to stay present to a commitment or to a person or to a situation. And we can train that muscle. And we can work a lot on communication and language, because in business or in life, a lot of it is both the speaking and the body together that's doing a lot of the communication. In fact, there's a UCLA study that said only 7% of the meaning of any communication is the words. 93% is nonverbal. Half of that being body language, and I think we're seeing a lot of good stuff coming out about that these days. And the other half is voice tone and inflection, which is driven by your emotional state. So, that's an example there of working on the attention and focus. And so on the body side, our history, we can't do anything about that, right? But we can do something about energy, and we can do something about practices, and we can do something about action. And when we take those practices together and we work particularly on managing the energy that's in our body, then that starts to affect our emotional state. And I have a fun little joke that I tell at this point in the lecture where I say, I haven't met many men that really want to sign up for emotional development as part of their leadership training. And, and that's okay, because if we're working on, the mind side, it affects the body, it affects the emotions. If we work on the body side, it affects the mind, it affects the emotions. So we can get to it by working on the other elements. I think a lot of emotions that kind of take over us or can take over us, can get us worried, that we're going to be inappropriate somehow. We're going to say or do something wrong. And not having the training or the practice to channel that energy in a healthy way can have us worry more, I think. But when we start working with the body and some of these practices, then it can bring those amplitudes down a little bit. And what we want is for people to be really authentic and have that be engaging for other people, not scary or wooden, if you will. And you learn to trust yourself. So that's the first three. And then around those three, we have the distinction of mood, which is interesting for business.
Okay.
Not many people are talking about mood. We're talking a lot about culture now. Every organization has a culture, and we're seeing how important that is, particularly in conscious capitalism. It's one of the 4 tenets of the conscious capitalism movement, having that great culture. But organizations and individuals have moods, and what the mood is the story that runs us.
Mm-hmm.
So we are the story animals. And we look at all the other animals, they have communication, they have biologies, they have all this, but as far as we know, they're not telling stories. And that's very, very human. We make sense of everything with a story. And I think for leadership, that's all we have today about the future is a story. We can have some plans and we can have some evidence about the past, but we use that to make up a story about the future. And the movie industry and books, that's never going to go out of style. It's so important. So we get to look at, what story is running us, what story are we fallen into, we adopted without maybe choice, and how's that affecting our mind, our body, our emotions. And what story do we need to be in to get to where we want to go?
Can you give an example of one of those stories?
Yeah, well, the 4 primary moods that human beings can be in, 2 positive, 2 negative, let's say. On the negative side, resentment. So some people live their life in a mood of resentment. Something happened in the past that they're opposed to, and they're still stuck on that, and that's still working them.
Still chewing on that
Yeah,
bone.
yeah, still chewing on that bone. And, they might be right about it, and it probably did happen, and they could keep telling that story, but it may not be compelling for other people to be involved with them in their new great project, right? Another negative one that can affect people, or primary one, is resignation. The story that I don't have possibilities in the future, that the future isn't exciting or bright for me, can become resigned. And we can see, and I know there's a lot of great work being done where they can actually see, changes in someone's health connected to the stories that they live in. I think Matthew Budd's work, you might be familiar with, he did a great piece. He's a Harvard MD. He wrote a book called You Are What You Think, You Are What You Say You Are.
Mm-hmm. I know the book. I mean, I've heard of the book.
Yeah, and he took on hypochondriacs, and if you look at hypochondriacs, it's validated, it's real that they are actually sick, but nothing's wrong with them. And he's a Harvard MD, and he wanted to take this on, but he'd studied with Fernando Flores, so he took this kind of linguistic approach to it, started looking at mood, and what he discovered was that these were people who weren't in a rich network of conversations with other people in their community. So they're being alone and isolated. And we humans are social creatures. We need to be in an exchange of energy with other people to be alive and be vibrant. So they make themselves sick so they can have someone that they respect be the customer of somebody they respect, like a doctor, and they get to have complaints and visits and attention and energy. And so the fix was they started taking these people and putting them into groups and giving them projects, and they started getting well. And all they did was change their social structure and the conversations they were in. Pretty interesting. So then on the positive side of mood, you have, let's say, the mood of peace, acceptance, tranquility. Everything's fine. And from that place, everything's possible. And there's nothing right, nothing wrong, everything's good. And then you can have another primary mood is a mood of ambition, where you're really up to something in the future and you're excited and you see possibilities and you're up for that. So that's a big example of those four moods. And then the last piece of that dimension of the self is we label that as spirit. And for us, this is the boundary between the finite self that we are and everything that's not us or beyond us. And my research, I find that all great leaders have a spiritual practice, but there isn't a right one or a best one. Whether it could be a fundamental old school religion, or it could be something very new age. And it's, I think, important to be a great leader to be the kind of person that knows that if you have a great idea, it's not just you having the great idea. You don't have your ego isn't running the show. The great idea or the synergy or the perfect connection came in the right way, and it will come in the right way, and it's about keeping yourself open and maybe more authentic rather than heroic, old school. So, we don't subscribe any particular spiritual practice, but we recommend people have something, keep themselves open and keep the ego in check. And those would be some examples there.
That reminds me, where was there a tipping point in your life when this became your calling, so to speak?
Yeah.
I presume there's some kind of major shift happened in you at some point in time, or multiple shifts.
Yeah, I'd say it's more of a long, slow transition. I was always interested in business because my father had his own company since I was 5 years old. He was the first guy to grow, pack, and ship alfalfa sprouts to supermarkets in 1967. So that was a weird business, even in Southern California back then. And so I was in this kind of entrepreneurial family, and I always was going to do something with business. And so I was, college and graduate school and not knowing exactly what I was going to do. And But meeting Fernando Flores when I was 27 was certainly the beginning of it. And
That was after the Navy?
yeah, I was in the Navy from 17 to 21. Then I started college.
Okay.
So I finished graduate school at 27. And that kind of put me, on this path in the early days, although I didn't know where it was going to lead or what was going to happen. And along the way, meeting different people and having different things. But one pivotal moment was after a few years of starting to be a consultant under the tutelage of a gentleman named Richard Lacander, who had been a former vice president of United Airlines and had been working with Fernando Flores for a while. And I was really green and, more enthusiasm than competency, if anything. But we had got this assignment to change the culture of a bank in Minneapolis, and it was a big deal. And I was supposed to be the lead on this. And I remember getting into the elevator of the bank with a woman on the first floor. I'm going to go up to the top floor, maybe 12 floors or so. And the elevator goes up about 2 floors, and another woman gets on and sees the first woman, and she says, "Oh, there you are. I'm so happy to see you. I was just going to come up to your desk." And the first woman recoiled in her body. I just watched this whole thing, and she kind of recoiled in her body, turned her shoulder and said, "Why? You weren't going to bring me any work, were you?" And she said, no, I was going to invite you to lunch. He goes, "Oh, okay, great. That's fantastic," And then we rode up the elevator and they chatted. But I remember being so struck by, isn't work an opportunity to produce value for other people? Isn't work something where you get to shine? Isn't work? And that this woman was recoiling in her body. And of course, we all know that in many organizations, people suffer and they're there to support their family and they're getting a check, but the conditions are terrible and they're stressed out. And so this really was kind of an injustice to me. And, if anything, I thought work was a place where you should, become healthier and shine and get to make a contribution rather than being stressed out and become sick. So that was kind of kept me going for a while on that path.
What is your spiritual practice? How would you define it?
My spiritual practice is making sure I don't think I'm better than anyone or anything. I don't try to think of myself as special. And it takes a lot of work to keep the ego in check and to walk that walk.
That's basically managing the ego.
Yeah. That's it. Now, I learned transcendental meditation when I was 14 years old, and I've been involved in many different things. My wife Kathleen and I have been studying indigenous wisdom for quite a number of years, and we're pretty committed to that path. What I like about it is it's really old. It worked for a really long time, and it gets you closer to the earth, and it involves your whole body, And so I think it's interesting to be a student of that. And this is something else I wanted to mention, John. I thought you might be intrigued by this. A lot of the great work that's going on now in multiple or many different expressions, but I know we both know the work of the Pachamama Alliance. And we're looking at human beings on the planet and what's happening with the planet and, sustainability issues and things like that. And when I started the Institute for Embodied Wisdom, one of the secret purposes of the project was to get people more in touch with their bodies, to live an embodied life, to not just cut your head off, if you will.
Your body off.
Yeah, or cut your body off, yeah. And my personal view is this, is that at some point in human development, we started, we discovered like science, scientific method, modern medicine, engineering, science, which has given us so much, right? But the cost of that is we've lost relationship with our bodies and that whole self and that whole being. And my personal belief is that we can only be in relationship with the earth through our body, not through our mind. And so we cut ourselves off from our head, and we cut ourselves off from our relationship to the earth. And then we can take our scientific mind, we can divide and slice and dice and, make all these grids and separations, and then we can extract and we can do different things because we aren't in relationship with it anymore. This becomes a thing, and then we manage the thing. And so the more that we get in touch with ourselves, the more we can be in relationship with the whole. And I think we can all be healthier for that.
Touche.
one of our teachers, our Khan, he told a story which I thought was a fantastic example of this, that in the Mayan temples, there are paintings of the Mayan kings or the Mayan high priests and priestess, and they're depicted, these paintings, the Mayan king is holding up the severed head. There's a sword, and they're holding a severed head by the hair. And for a long time, Western archaeologists were interpreting this as how powerful they were winning these battles and things. And he taught us no, that the reason they became the king or the high priest is because they cut off their own head and they slayed their own ego.
Hmm.
And that's what the depictions were. I thought that was beautiful.
Well, this seems like a good place to bring in them and open it up for questions or comments, not speeches.
You
have
mentioned
two
your
microphones.
interest in indigenous cultures, and I'm wondering if you uncovered any cultures where the reflective leader is more predominant.
The reflective leader.
Well, the thoughtful, conscious leader, whatever. Yeah.
What was
Well-
the last word, Catherine?
Reflective is the.
Yeah,
Oh,
or the
or-
more prominent.
More prominent,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I'm not an anthropologist, and I haven't necessarily made a study of, all the cultures, but just from my rude or basic understanding, I think on the American plains in particular with the councils that a lot of the tribes would have, I think that's a great example, where the answer and the wisdom is coming from, a group of people, and there's time taken, and there's a certain ethos, if you will, to having those conversations, so that wisdom could come forward. And if you think about it, for as long as those cultures were on the planet surviving, that must have worked pretty well, But I'm sure there's a lot of great examples. I don't know.
Me over here?
Thank you for your conversation. I'm curious about the samurai
Is the
game.
mic on?
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on. I can hear.
Can you hear? Okay.
I'm curious about the samurai game. What happens, and are you going to offer it locally?
Samurai game.
What a setup.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the Samurai game, who here's played Samurai game? Several people played? Okay, good. Yeah. The Samurai game was invented by George Leonard. And George Leonard was one of the pioneers of the human potential movement, as most people know. Very instrumental in bringing Aikido to the United States, and written, how many books did he write?
I don't know
20?
how many, lots.
Yeah. And just a great man. And the Samurai game has been referred to, well, 30 years ago, maybe 35 years ago, he invented it. It's widely regarded as the most powerful one-day personal development experience you can have. And that's cool, And it's a role-play game where you become a samurai in 14th century Japan, living and dying by the code of Bushido, pledging your allegiance to a warlord or a daimyo, a kind of a king, fighting another army to the death, and it's takes your whole self to kind of play this game. And in the course of doing this, what's so beautiful about the design is that you get to see yourself under pressure, under stress, because you're put into an unscripted, chaotic environment where there's a lot of dilemmas and the rules aren't exactly clear. And there's big consequences for everything that happens and doesn't happen. And some of the consequences are, well, let's say you don't want them. I'll say more about what that is in a second. So George, who invented the game, George Leonard, the way I understand the story is, we all know that George was a fighter pilot in World War II fighting the Japanese. And he would go to fighter pilot reunions after the war, and they would reminisce about the war, and all the fighter pilots shared that they had a similar experience, that when they were flying into combat, they felt superhuman. They noticed that their vision was more acute, their hearing was better, their sense of touch, smell, all of this had expanded, and it gave them this feeling of being superhuman. And so George started to speculate, I wonder if we could reproduce that feeling without actually flying into combat, because all of us detest war and combat. So this is a question he had, and he was living in Japan after the war, working as a photographer for Look magazine, covering the reconstruction of Japan, and learning Aikido when this kind of came to him, this game. And so he took it and played it with his fighter pilot buddies, and they had that experience of having their senses expanded. And so the basic structure of the game is, to George's ideal format, it's a day and a half a day kind of learning how to play the game, a half a day playing the game, and then the next half a day extracting all the learning and the wisdom from your experience. Kathleen and I both got to play with George at his dojo. I'd first heard about it 9 years before I'd gotten to play it. So I heard about it, so, oh, this is fantastic, I want to do this, you know, and maybe setting the intention or something, and then the invitation came to play. So we rushed up and we played, and Kathleen was the winning general that day. And so you can ask her about that. She's got a fun story about it. But that started a process where I was able to become certified to lead the work. I'm very honored to be able to do that. And it's fun, and it's challenging, and it's interesting, and good.
You mentioned, when we were talking before we started, that you'd be willing to offer it to a group of our group people up
Be
here.
happy to.
So stay tuned. We'll see how that goes. I'm
Yeah.
doing one up here. I have a short George Leonard story. George Leonard and Michael Murphy, in my view, kind of started the human potential movement. And I remember them having a series of evenings here in San Francisco where they were telling stories about those days, and specifically that day. They knew there was a movement. They knew there was something going on. They didn't know what the name was for it, but they actually sat there and came up with the phrase human potential and the process of going through that. So I consider him the co-founder
Yeah.
of the human potential movement,
Absolutely.
he and Michael. Other questions?
Did I answer all your questions about the samurai game?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I should say what the consequences, though. I said the severe consequences. So one of the unique things about the game is you do a battle. As a samurai, you come out to the battlefield against another samurai from the opposing army, and you're going to battle to the death. Now, the battles are just games of skill or games of chance, like rock, paper, scissors, or a staring contest. Okay. Or maybe something more complex like balancing on one foot. Okay. So there's a winner and a loser, right? If you lose, you, quote, die, which is a role in the game, and you lay on the floor and then you're dead. But you need to do that according to the Code of Bushido, so with integrity and impeccability, which means you're not moving if you're dead. You're playing the role of a dead samurai. Now, you can't go to sleep either. So the game can last for 4 hours. So if you die early, your experience could be lying dead on the floor for 4 hours, and nobody wants that, right? So you get a lot of animation, and that really starts to show you yourself and your ego, you know, and how you face that moment. You're welcome.
Yes.
To what extent, if at all, have you found when you do this work with leaders, and I would say mostly in larger corporations, when they have become in touch with their body more so and the connection has been made, that they realize they're in the wrong place?
You know, I haven't had it where someone gets more in touch with their body and then realizes they're in the wrong place. I have had where I've worked with people and they decide they want to become a consultant or they want to train other people in this work because they're so enthused about it, not necessarily because they became more in touch with their body necessarily. So, but But I would like to say this about that, is that, when I go into a corporation, I don't go in saying right off the bat, we're going to be working with your bodies. It's almost a little bit taboo. They're in there to increase productivity or profitability or to accomplish some objective they already have. And we slowly introduce it to them because it can be very foreign and uncomfortable for some of them. I had one client where the CEO of a very large company, billion-dollar company, and very committed to learning and developing and wanting the team to be great, and was open for this work. But we had to drive to another town to do the work behind the closed church, so nobody would have a chance of him seeing him do the work in some simple body-oriented postures and practices, if you will. And that was part of a big transformation for that organization and big results. But so it's still a little bit, outside of some people's comfort zone. So how you introduce it to them and when you introduce it to them is really, really important. But in terms of just because they got in touch with their body, they decide to do something else, I haven't seen that. What I do see a lot is this. And this is part of why we introduce it to them. And I'll give you a small case study because we just got all the data in at January 15th. Is they get more hopeful about being a better leader and to actually make their organization great. They see the missing link. They see what they've been doing that hasn't been helping, and they see the opportunity to lead differently and to get other people into this game. I started working with a company about 3.5 years ago. It was one of the worst situations I ever walked into. It's an industrial company in the Midwest. They hadn't met their budget 2 months in a row for 7 years. They couldn't get 2 months in a row together for 7 years. They were supposed to do an EBITDA of $40 million a year, earnings before depreciation and tax, $40 million in order to justify the return on capital that was invested in them. But they're doing 20, 23, 17. They had fires, flood, union lockout. They had environmental consent decrees and penalties. They had safety issues and quality issues, high turnover, and sabotage. And I had the opportunity to come in and talk about maybe helping them. And fortunately, I was able to, all I did was ask the senior team to go away for a 2-day retreat. And we started introducing them to some of this work in a very kind of safe way. And 3 years later, they have completely transformed that organization where they just, January 15, closed the books with $55 million EBITDA. They are on a perfect run of safety, a record safety run. They rebuilt the relationship with their union. Quality is an all-time high. They're getting customers back. And they just got word that the parent company is going to invest a whole bunch of money into that dying business, if you will, to have a whole new product line. So it's a very, very great success story, but it happened because they started not only, they started being real with each other, and they started loving each other. And you can't love each other if you're not in a relationship with your body. But it took about 2 years before they even be able to talk about that, how they felt about each other and what they're up to. And it became more than just business. It became about people's lives and the town and what the future was going to be. And they all had to walk through a lot of difficult things to make that happen.
How did you keep them engaged for 2 years? If it took them 2 years to get there?
It took 3 years.
No, but it took 2 years,
Oh,
you
yeah.
said, before they even got to that place.
Yeah, going out there every month, working with them for a day or two days. And first it was the senior team. Took maybe 9 months before the senior team really started to gel. And then, okay, let's invite the next group of people into the work. Let's invite the next group of people into the work. And, for people to want to really invest, be fully engaged, invest all their discretionary energy into this, they have to believe it. They have to see it. You just can't talk about it. It can't be a flavor of the month. It has to be real. And for it to be real, it has to be embodied. And for it to be embodied, that takes time. So really proud of them and happy. And you know, John Love, he worked with me on that quite
Oh,
closely.
yeah,
Yeah, he's largely responsible for a big portion of that success.
Good. Others?
I'm really fascinated by leading with the body because this is a fairly new concept to me. Could you give a technique, like a technique of getting more present with the body when you're get so in your head so often? That makes
Yeah. So is that your experience? You find yourself going your head so okay. That's very common. You know, we're so oriented to going there for the answers and having that take our attention. So some of the simplest practice, and we can all do this right now. It's something we do, very simple. You can do it with your eyes closed. We'll just do it for a minute, okay? And you can practice this at home. So if you close your eyes and you start breathing through your nose, long, slow breaths in or out. And breathe forcefully enough to generate the sensation of your breath entering and leaving your body. And if your nose is plugged up, breathe through your mouth. So you're always breathing in or out. You're never holding your breath. You're breathing a little stronger than you need to, just to create that sensation of your breath entering and leaving your body. And then choose to focus your attention, all the energy of your mind, on the sensation of your breath as it enters and leaves your body. That could be the tip of your nose, the back of your throat, small hairs in your nasal passage. It could be the cool air coming in and the warm breath coming out. And just hold it there for as long as you can, no matter what. At some moment, you'll become distracted by a thought or a noise. And that's part of the practice, too. You become distracted, nothing to worry about. You're not doing it wrong. It's just about being human. And then at some moment, you become aware that you're distracted. So first you're distracted. You might not be aware you're distracted because you're floating or drifting or thinking about something. Then you become aware, oh, I'm distracted. The moment of awareness of distraction, you might have a judgment about yourself, or you might start running some analytics about why it's happening. If that happens, that's still perfect, part of the practice. Let all that go and bring your attention back to your breath. And if you do this for 3 or 4 minutes, you could notice yourself become distracted 20, 30, 40 times. And that's normal and part of the practice. You just bring it back every single time. Okay. So we'll stop now. And when you do that practice, often you feel either relaxed or even sleepy or frustrated because your mind was going 100 miles an hour to other places. And it can have some benefit in doing it in the moment. Like I feel more, well, how did you feel after doing it?
very relaxed.
Okay, great. How many people felt more relaxed after doing it? Okay. How many people felt a little more anxious or distracted, or your mind's running around crazy? Anybody? Okay. So that's great. You have a short-term benefit, but it's a practice. We want you to do that every day. And that then increases your ability to put your attention on whatever you want to put it on. Okay? So that's the gateway to leading through the body, because if you can't put your attention in your body, then you can't lead with your body. Your body's just going to be on automatic all the time, doing whatever it's doing. You have to be able to have some awareness of what's happening in your body as you're having a conversation with somebody. And most people aren't. So if you're not aware, then you can't make any choices or take any different action other than what you're automatically going to do. I had an assignment once to help shift the culture of an organization. So what I often do is I'll just go observe the CEO for a couple of days. I go and observe this one CEO. And what I observed is he was in a lot of meetings all the time. So I can just, a whole bunch I observed about the meetings, but the story I'm going to tell is what happened between the meetings. So the guy would get up and go to the next meeting, and they're in different buildings and different places, so a lot of walking. And I would walk behind the guy and just observe. And as the guy walked between meetings, his head would be down like this. So, and he's walking, but his head's down. And so I looked at that and said, well, he might be thinking about what just happened in the last meeting, or he might be getting ready for the next meeting, I noticed that people would pass this gentleman in the hallways and say, good afternoon or good morning. And he might not respond at all. Often didn't. And so I'd say at the end of the day, hey, how come you didn't say hi to those people that said hi to you in the hallway? He goes, what people? So he didn't have the awareness of the embodiment of what he was doing on his walk and how it was affecting his relationship with people. So you can imagine walking past the CEO of a company and saying hi to them and you don't get a response back, and you don't even get an acknowledgement or even a smile. What does that make you think about yourself? So I can talk forever about this, but we have to embody. So first of all, I recently learned how to fly airplanes, and I went to the training, and I thought I knew a lot about stuff, and it was half an hour. I'm exhausted because there's so much to pay attention to, and I'm not used to doing it. It just, exhausting. Like I had done a physical workout in a gym. I'm that wasted from a half an hour flying lesson, because now I can do it without thinking. I've embodied the ability to do it, so it's actually energizing. It's not tiring at all. Well, if we're trying to pay attention to our body, it's going to be exhausting because you're using a lot of mental energy to try and do that. And when you're a beginner, you have to. But as you practice and you build the embodiment to do it, then you can have the awareness, you can make the adjustments without thinking. It becomes part of who you are. But that's why our leadership program is 6 months long. It takes that long to actually make those changes. Was that helpful?
It was very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's a first step, just to summarize, you got to be able to put your attention here. So if you don't have a trained attention, it's going to be difficult. Once you're able to put your attention here, that's the first step of a long journey to embodiment where it becomes automatic. And so then you can start playing with things like, okay, once I have this awareness, when I go into a situation, how do I want to be that's going to impact the situation in the most positive way? Am I going to hold myself really open and vulnerable so I can feel more? Or am I going to be more, we have the power poses and the Superman pose we've been seeing on TED, and those things can really help you in your own energy and your own confidence. But how does it land on the other people? Yeah. We all have the experience of being in a difficult conversation and then crossing our legs or crossing our arms. And, we do this. Well, why do we do this? Well, we do this to make ourselves more comfortable because we're trying to clamp down the emotions, or we're trying to survive the moment, and we get through it. But what is it communicating to other people? How is it affecting our leadership?
Or I stopped breathing.
Yeah.
I think going through that exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the first response all of us have, is the stress response in the body is to tighten up and stop breathing.
I like this one.
Oh,
Guys do this a lot,
Yeah,
I'm feeling something, I don't want to feel it, so.
yeah. That's called a tell in poker.
Oh, really? It's been too long since I've played poker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really curious what you think about, I think a lot of us have heard that many times we find people who are in leadership are people who have been involved in sports and athletics. And the whole looking for a place where we no longer have to bridge the gap of having made this disconnection, that athletes are some of our people who are very tuned into their body and have a portion of the mind and focus stuff, and I would also engender to say spirit as well. So I'm really curious how you see, if you see that connection or what it is about that connection that is a match for what you teach.
I'm going to just interrupt here to point out that Marilyn is a 3-time Olympic athlete.
Thank you.
From some time ago, obviously. but-
Does that involve guns?
That's the modern pentathlon.
Oh.
Hurdle, shot put, high jump, long jump.
Well, I think, I'd say a couple things. One is, people who've excelled in sports, kind of like to win, and have programmed themselves or trained themselves to get into dicey situations, and they're enthusiastic about it, and they like to measure themselves against a challenge. And a lot of the raw materials, let's say, for the potential for good leadership. So, energy, enthusiasm, getting focused on target, but we don't know if we're going to be successful. We're going to try anyway, and we're going to give it a full commitment, and that can be contagious for other people. But maybe I'm going to go a little different direction than you're asking, is that what we're seeing is this winning and winning at all cost model is not really working so well anymore. Because if we win and someone else loses, so I think some of the best leadership today is more collaborative and not so, I win and you lose kind of thing, and which gets back to like the heroic leadership and the ego, and we won. And this is I think some really, really good work. And so I think it takes someone beyond just athletics to have that sort of sensibility for not just having a winner and a loser. It's kind of it's an older way of getting a result, let's say. Now, is this getting close to what you're asking?
I completely understand what you're saying, and there's a lot, I completely agree in terms of the winning, losing part. It's more, I'm really curious because of how connected and how deeply you understand the embodiment part, that it's a beyond knowing kind of thing, and a very high level of ability to focus.
And
Anyway, just-
athletes have that ability. If they're successful at the elite level, you've mastered the ability to focus, otherwise you wouldn't be there. That's the first thing. Very, very important, that piece.
So because you talked about, how people communicate trust and so forth, if you take someone from athletics who has that ability, knows how to win, and we can let the win at all costs go. But how they're communicating in that variety of ways that you talked about around engendering trust, it was just really very interesting to me to just keep bouncing back and forth to seeing what I see come from athletics.
Yeah.
That there's as a
Well, for instance, because the Super Bowl's coming, I'm not necessarily an NFL fan per se, but I watch certain players or certain teams for a lot of the dynamics there, and I'm a real Peyton Manning fan. I think he really embodies great leadership in how he conducts himself. He's authentic, he's real, he's light, he has fun, he doesn't take things too serious, but he never throws his teammates under the bus. He never takes credit, And if you just watch the last game where they won the AFC Championship, I believe, and so, he's on the field, he's saying some words to the other coach and the other quarterback and the other players. It's early on in that, somebody from his team came and gave him the championship shirt and the championship hat, and he didn't put those on until he got done talking to all the other players. It's just those subtle things, how they conduct themselves. And going back to my experience with the Navy SEALs, one of the things that I was always struck by, and what I think a hallmark of great leadership, when you have maybe some of the best athletes can do this too, is you don't need to yell. You don't have to raise your voice necessarily to get a result. You can get the result out of how you conduct yourself. And sometimes we see that in sports. We get inspired by certain athletes in terms of their work ethic or their humility or their sportsmanship or whatever.
That's why we're enjoying the Warriors right now.
Yeah, good.
I have a question about your experience of the difference between the challenges that the men you're coaching face versus the women, and what embodiment transformation is more likely to look like for a woman leader.
And if you could say what % of CEOs you coach were women, would be very good.
I had an assignment once. I worked with this a woman. I'm going to keep her name private because I haven't got her permission to speak about it publicly, but she She was a CFO, Chief Financial Officer, of a very large business that was in a portfolio of 90 other businesses run by one of the world's largest companies. And she was pretty good at that. And I'd worked with her for a year on helping her in that role, and she was great as a CFO. So then we were looking at maybe working together for another year. So my question was, well, why would we want to do that, you know? What would you like to do? And she said, well, I think I'd like to do, I don't really want to say it because I don't think it's possible. I'm like, well, what, come on, this sounds exciting. And she said, well, what I'd like to do is be the CEO of one of these companies that in the portfolio here. I said, fantastic, let's work on that. And she said, well, the only problem is there's only, of the 90 companies, there's only one of them that has a woman as CEO, so those odds aren't so good. And nobody has gone from being CFO, man or woman, over to being the CEO of one of these companies. Once you're in that kind of line that or that role, you're not going to move over into the line management. I said, oh, let's do it. It's going to be great. So she committed herself to that journey of becoming CEO of one of these companies within a year. And if she had to leave the company to do it, she would leave because, you know, she wanted to be a CEO of a company. And so obviously women run into a lot of issues that men don't run into around gender inequality and glass ceilings and a whole bunch of story that I might not even be qualified to name all of it. So she had some of that, but then just anybody trying to make that leap has issues around self-confidence, around public identity, around being thought of as a possibility for that, you know? And I think when I take a look at a lot of the people I've worked with and particularly some of the women who've gone through my leadership program, one of the stories that comes up often is taking care of themselves while they're out being committed to something that's bigger than themselves. And you know, there's a lot of evidence and reason why they might be worried or should be worried because of the kind of the way the game is maybe stacked against them. And if you're out there worried about taking care of yourself, well, then your attention is focused there a little bit. So that can really play negatively into what can happen as a result. So with this particular woman, you know, what her experience was is she got committed to this and started doing a lot of the things she needed to do in order to have this happen, which really, I mean, if you think about it, let's say you're on the group that decides who gets to be CEO for one of these companies at this large conglomerate level. In most businesses, there's a lot of really clear, you know, job descriptions. But the higher up you go, the less clear the job descriptions are. It's more like you know it when you see it, and you know, it's maybe more who you know and how you conduct yourselves than actually meeting a set of job descriptions. And so she's exploring who makes the decision and what are they looking for when they make this decision. You've kind of got to be it before you can have it. You know, you got to already believe it. You've already got to conduct yourself. You got to be kind of acting in a way authentically where they go, oh, this person's the perfect CEO for this position. So what had happened to her is that, and she's telling people she wants this job or wants to get promoted, and this is what she's committed to, and all of the men that were in charge would say, oh, you're not happy in your job. Okay, I got it. We're going to give you a better CFO job in a better country or at a bigger company, or you want more responsibility as the CFO, or you want more money. They weren't lining up with what she was committed to. They couldn't hear or see that possibility. And but she stayed committed to this, and then when she put in her resignation because she was committed to being CEO somewhere. If they weren't obviously lining up behind her commitment, is when they started paying attention that she was serious. And then within 1 year, she was promoted to being CEO of a small unit in Australia and did a beautiful job there, taking care of the people. And then that little business got a little bigger and got a little bigger, and then there was a big reorganization, and she ended up on the steering council for the whole large conglomerate and retired very wealthy. So,
Did
I don't know.
that answer your question, Leslie? I have a hunch that we didn't quite land on it.
Well, first of all,
Yeah.
this is a kind of self-confidence thing when you're in an environment where there may not be equality or fairness, to face all that. That's a special challenge, I think.
We so often hear that there's a kind of double bind for women, that if they are too assertive, it may come across as aggressive and actually work against them. And so the same type of behavior that might be acceptable for a man in terms of feeling powerful and grounded, and a person might be very grounded in their, a woman might be very grounded in coming across in a way that she believes is assertive and still be perceived as aggressive. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that, but part of what I'm hearing you say is having the awareness of how you are impacting other persons is part of the practice that you're helping people develop.
Right, that's right. I'd say two things about that, Leslie, is one, for all of us, a man or a woman, so people without the training are really, committed to having something happen, and you're being really committed to having something happen. When you get really committed and you're frustrated or the situation isn't happening or people aren't paying attention, and so you got to amp up your commitment level. And whether you're a man or a woman, you get too much energy awakened in your body, you can express yourself in a way that backs people up. Now, unfortunately, in some companies, maybe if a woman does that, that's unacceptable, and if a man does that, it is forgiven or something, And so the second piece is, what I say to everybody is never go for a job, always go for a boss. Because you can't change yourself or make up for a terrible culture. So if you're in a bad culture where that's not acceptable or you get discounted, you might need to move companies to go to a place where you can be your authentic self and be recognized for it. And that's an unfortunate, reality. You can't change yourself so much that you're going to make up for a bad culture. And you might not even be authentic, And thank you for the question. Yeah. Thank you.
Catherine?
You use the term embodied leader a lot, and I wonder, just to help us better appreciate the connotations for you, if you could describe some that you've observed that we might be aware of, or as you did with Peyton Manning, some of the behaviors that for you are representative of that approach.
I haven't met Bill Clinton, but everybody says that he's got that going on. That he has a high degree, obviously we know he's super intelligent, like IQ, but he has a lot of emotional intelligence. And the stories are that when you meet Bill Clinton, you feel like you've known him for a long time, and he has that ability. Now some people who are like that, we will say they're very charismatic, and we have a story that charismatic people might be born that way. But my belief is that it's really it's a body-oriented competency to be able to be with somebody, look at them, meet them, shake their hand, converse with them, you're exchanging energy, and be able to hold all that energy and keep yourself open and not shy away from it. And when you're first doing that, first learning this, it can be tough to do that because you got so much energy awakening your body and be able to hold that. But as you practice, you can just do it quite naturally. So, but it'd be fun here to hear from other people, like who do you experience that way that's in the public eye that maybe that you've met, or maybe shout out a couple names. We can talk about them. Anybody?
Willie Brown.
Willie Brown. Yeah, I got to meet Willie Brown. Yeah, very charismatic and energetic and out there. Yeah. So,
I'm struck by the changes in Hillary Clinton. You brought up the Clintons, how I think in the past election against Obama, she was infinitely more strident, and how she, I think, has become more accessible, infinitely more accessible, just through her body, just the way she shows up. Chin used to be up, chin's down, you know, her body is more relaxed. And I find that, I've always been a fan of hers, but I find that much more compelling, that she feels like she's at home with herself now. And I think she's a really good example of feminine leadership for that reason.
thank you.
Hi, I have a question about a visualization as a component of leadership. I'll explain a little bit. Back to the sports analogy. I play both baseball and golf, and I find that if I visualize my shot or visualize what I'm going to do, that it increases my likelihood of that actually happening successfully. And so in what I've been hearing, it's kind of been circling around this thought of embodying, having a foresight of where you might want to take this. Your example about your woman becoming a CEO, she must have visualized that. Can you elaborate on visualization as a component
Sure.
of your...
Sure. I mean, I think there's plenty of evidence. Sports world, I think the East Germans were the first to start bringing some of these techniques in. I raced bicycles for many years on the amateur level, at the world level, and practiced a lot of that. And so we know the science and the technology behind that visualization starts to set up neural pathways in the body, and you see yourself doing the ski run in advance, and then your performance can happen that way. We see in personal development a lot around setting intentions or vision boards, or putting a picture. Certainly, any concern you have about the future for yourself, imagining it today as already taking place or in the future can really, really be powerful to help guide our actions and support us. I think that when you talked about it, when you first started asking me your question, Dave, you were talking about like in the context of leadership. I think where it gets a little bit tricky is it's okay to visualize for yourself, because we kind of have some degree of control about ourselves. But when you start to visualize something for a group of people, if they don't have that same vision, then it could be a little bit challenging. So part of leadership is getting everybody to have the same vision. So we hear about vision statements, and unfortunately, sometimes they can just be a bunch of marketing words on paper and not really have anything, really. But this is part of great leadership, is getting everyone lined up together on the result that we want to have, and that can help everybody get there. Is this what you're asking? Yeah, so do more of that, and very, very important. We always say it's the what, not the how. And this is, I think, another really great thing. So the vision is the what, right? Get really clear on the what. The how is going to show up along the way. The how is, you can have an idea today about how to do it, but tomorrow you can have a better idea. Most people want to figure out how before they will commit to the what. And our intellectual brains are trying to figure out how to do things. And we can sit there for months trying to figure out how, and we're not taking any action. So if we're not taking action, we're not learning. We're not getting our whole self into it. So get clear on the what and launch yourself into the unknown, and you'll figure it out along the way. But what's also great about that is that when you do that, other people see how committed you are and they want to help you. But if you're standing there trying to figure it out because you don't want to make a mistake, they can't see that commitment, so they don't want to help you.
Yeah. John?
Just an example, Morton Lund, a long time ago, Ski Magazine, and he was reading Tim Galway's Inner Game stuff. And so he came up with the 3 Ps of skiing. And I was a ski instructor, and so I decided, I'll try this. And it was kind of interesting because I was in ski school lineup, and all of a sudden, these guys came in, and there were 4 guys with 4 women, and they threw the women on their skis all in a big pile into the middle of the ski school lineup and said, teach them, we don't want to be with them. And so it was really very embarrassing. And so the pre-visualization thing, what I did was I took these, they were crying. It was sad. And so we went and we had a little monitor, and I could look, and we pre-visualized skiing. That is, we actually visualized skiing, I should say. And they watched this small film on all different kinds of things, and it showed that the skis actually bend and all kinds of stuff, so they didn't think they were straight boards. And then we took them out onto the little beginner slope, and we did the 3 Ps. And the first one was to sit there and pre-visualize what they had just seen. And then they had to try to look at this little tiny slope and approximate a move. And I guided them into a move. And it worked. And by the way, by the afternoon, I had them on the slope, the intermediate slope, and all of a sudden, these 4 balls of snow came running towards us. I mean, they were just falling down the slope all over, and it was the 4 guys. And they just looked at them and said, we're done with you. So it was interesting because the visualization does work, and you pay attention and you get them engaged in what you want to do, and you give them a feeling of what you do, and it works. So it's kind of fun. Tim Galway's cool. I worked with him, and he's just like, whoa, way over the top.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight and coming up from Ohio. I have a hunch that other things up here besides this attracted you. And for your wife coming and your oldest friend coming and all the crowd you brought. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, John. Thanks
Appreciate
for having me.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Scott. Terrific having you here this evening. Thank you all for attending. I'd like to once again thank the folks here at the Gladstone Institutes for letting us use the facility and helping enable this to happen. I really would encourage you all to come again next month for our guest, Susan McGinnis, and encourage you to remind your friends and invite others to attend as well. Thank you.